10 indicators that you might have a me-first mindset. Are you ready? Number 10. You might have a me-first mindset if you pulled into a parking space in front of the retired guy in the white Buick with the Michigan license plates who had been patiently waiting his turn. Number 9, you went to the 20 items only express lane at Publix because it was crowded at the other registers, fully knowing that you had 25 items. Number 8, you ate the last bit of ice cream or potato chips or cookies and looked shocked when someone asked, "Where are they?" Number 7, you forgot to tell your parent or spouse about the call that came in on call waiting while you were busy on the phone with your friend. Number 6, you passed on that tidbit of gossip that you heard about a friend because it made you look better. Number 5, you accepted credit from your boss or teacher for a job that you knew somebody else had done. Number 4, you assume that if someone doesn't like the same things you like, well then they must have very little taste. Number 3, you gave a gift not thinking of what the person must like, but thinking of what you liked instead. Number 2, you get all the old, outdated cans from your pantry to take to the church's food pantry. And the number 1 indicator that you might have a me-first mindset is, you give a huge sigh of relief in knowing that you aren't as poorly dressed, ill-mannered, unimportant, unintelligent, or just plain tacky as those self-centered sinners who are sitting around you in the congregation today. Well, we may laugh, but it's sad to say that all of us suffer to some degree from the me-first mindset. Some of us probably more than others. And yet the passage that Laura read says that thinking of self first is the furthest thing from Jesus' mind. A me-first mindset begins with the assumption that I am the most important person in the world, and everything and everybody else should revolve around me, my needs, my feelings, with no regards for anyone else. And if you know anything at all about Jesus, you know that this is not how he lived his life. In fact, his life was in direct contrast to this, as he exhibited an others-first mindset, as he went out of his way to love and serve others. As we began this series last week on living with the mind of Christ, we spoke of the challenge that Paul gives to us to live that way. We said it didn't mean just to say or do the things that looked good so that others would think, "Oh, look at that Christian over there." We said it wasn't just about readjusting some of the external things in our life. No, we said that it was going to take a radical reorientation of our thinking, of our mindset, if indeed we were to live with the mind of Christ. And we said that agape love is what would give us the power and the motivation to make that kind of a change. You see, we have to reach that point where we're not satisfied with the way things are, where we're not satisfied with the status quo or with our role of being, one of my favorite words, a passive pew potato, where we look out for ourselves only. We need to have that aha moment when we realize that there is a big difference between the mindset of Jesus that we read about throughout the scriptures and our mindset, and finally come to the conclusion that we're in desperate need of a mental transplant if indeed we're to become more like Christ. Today's text tells us that the disciples had definitely not reached that point yet. I guess, and that's encouraging to us, isn't it? Here they are. They're arguing, they're fussing, they're bickering, whatever you want to call it, all about who among them was the greatest. Think about it. Jesus is about to tell them that he's going to die, and already they're jockeying over to see who's going to have the prime spot at his right or his left hand. Their dispute wasn't that out of the ordinary. It was pretty typical, really. Their dispute shows their brokenness and their humanness. It shows our sin. Each of us can probably think of numerous times that we've seen those kind of arguments, maybe in our own families or amongst friends. some arguments that center on self-interest, that center on this me-first mindset, that becomes the core of the problem. We see it from the sandbox to the boardroom. We see it from the athletic field to divorce court, from friendships, and yes, even to families after a funeral. This orientation says that we should get what we want when we want it, and to heck with everybody else. So here are the disciples, gathered in a home to celebrate the Passover meal together. They would have bathed at the Roman bath before coming to the house, and there were hot and cold running water, saunas, and other comforts. And then they would have walked to their destination, to this upper room, in their sandaled feet on dirty, unpaved roads. You can imagine what their feet looked like. When they arrived, it was the custom that a servant would meet them right there at the door and wash their feet. But on this particular night in the upper room, there was no servant to greet them. So they continued their discussions and kind of found their place around the table. You might say they continued playing mirror, mirror on the wall. Who's the greatest of us all? It was all about them. And Jesus? He's just hours from the cross. He's spending his last precious moments with his closest friends. These are the ones he's going to entrust his kingdom to. And what is he faced with? 24 dirty feet and arguments. I imagine that there is a point during the meal that Jesus just kind of sits back and takes it all in. He looks from one disciple to another, and he wonders if they have any clue about what is going to happen and what he expects from them. And then he couldn't wait any longer. In the middle of dinner, Jesus stood. He took off his outer garment, a robe that reached to his feet, and then he took off his inner robe, a long tunic, dressed only in a short robe that reached to his knees, something that not a rabbi would have worn, but something a servant would have worn. He took a bowl of water, he took a towel, and he started washing the disciples' feet. That got their attention. A rabbi didn't do that sort of thing. It was shocking. It was out of the ordinary. It was unheard of. And if that wasn't enough, he shared truth with these men that he loved so much. He shared with them what kind of a mindset they were to have. We heard Laura say, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who have authority over them are called benefactors. But not so with you. It's not the way you're to live. Let him who is the greatest among you become as the youngest, and make the leader become the servant. Well, that wasn't the leadership model that they were used to then, and it's not the leadership model we're used to now. The disciples and us are used to that corporate model that includes bossing, patronizing, commanding, controlling, and expecting gratitude for the slightest acts of kindness. What was Jesus talking about? It had to have taken them a while to digest these words, because what Jesus was suggesting was totally opposite of what they were familiar with. And yet, Jesus had done exactly what he had done all throughout his ministry. He had given them a visual example of what they were to do. He modeled what a servant or a slave would do. His manner was lowly, even down to the clothing that he wore as he got down on his knees with a towel and a basin full of water. Though he had all of the authority in heaven and earth, he never pulled rank or insisted on his own way. Paul says it this way: he emptied himself, taking on the form of a servant. Jesus' leadership was not to be above them, but to become a servant who, you might say, preferred others and deferred to their needs. His whole life was an expression of servanthood. He told his disciples in Matthew, both Matthew and Mark, he says, I did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give my very life as a ransom for all. Jesus' model of authority and leadership wasn't a slight alteration of secular leadership. It was of a completely different nature. That's what he was telling his disciples. In my kingdom, things will be turned totally upside down. And just in case they didn't get it, Jesus said again to his disciples, I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Now, those of you who are parents out there, I would imagine there are many times that you have said to your children, do as I say, or do as I do, right? Many of you have done that. And it's usually a time when you're trying to teach them a life lesson. But you may also have noticed that there comes a time when that there may be a problem when they catch you doing something that you told them not to do, where there is a disconnect between what you said and what you did. And have you ever had it throw back in your face, but Mom, you said, or Dad, that's not the way you told me to do it. Why are you doing it that way? You know, we can never catch Jesus in a disconnect like that, though. What he said, he did. And what he did, he said. There's no doubt that what he wanted us to do. He not only said we should love and serve others, but he also lived a life and died a life of servant. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one from another, said the gospel writer John. You see, this is love. Being a servant. Not going out and buying everything you can to give to someone. Not doing it for them. Not lavishing gift upon gift upon gift upon people, but living the life of a servant. That's how people know you love them. You see, that others first mindset, it comes naturally when we love God and love others. I think that Jesus washed the disciples' feet because he was focused on the needs of others. And he knew that just telling them that wasn't going to get it. He knew that he had to drop to his knees and actually wash those dirty, stinking feet to make his point. I know that I don't need to tell you that there are those out there today who still are looking out for number one. That was true in Jesus' time, and it's true today. From the moment of birth, people urge others to meet their needs. The infant cries until mom or dad comes in to change them or feed them. The toddler misbehaves until dad stops playing with the little sister and gives full attention to him. When kids get older, siblings often demand privileges in at least equal portion to, or preferably in greater amounts than, their brothers and sisters. We as adults seek for highest paying jobs, the most comfortable homes, the most prestigious cars, and the most extravagant vacations possible. And we're willing to go to considerable trouble and debt to achieve these ends. What began as a survival instinct quickly becomes an expression of our fallen human nature. But this Jesus who healed the blind, fed the hungry, made the lame to walk, forgave a woman who was despised by others and committed adultery. This Jesus who wept at his friend's grave, who touched the one who had leprosy, who changed the life of a greedy tax collector named Zacchaeus. This Jesus who took children in his arms, now drops to his knees with a towel and basin, washes the tired, aching, calloused, filthy feet of his disciples. This, he says, this is how you live with an others first mindset. This is how you live with the mind of Christ. The Son of Christ did not come to be served, but to serve. Servanthood is not just something that Jesus did. Servanthood is who Jesus was and is. And just as Jesus modeled the life of a servant for his disciples, we as the church need to do the same. We may not know it, but there are people that we encounter every day who look at us as Christians, who look at us as churchgoers. Do they see a disconnect between what we say and what we do? Do they say, for that person being a Christian, I can't imagine them acting the way they're doing. I can't imagine them treating others the way they treat. I can't imagine those words coming out of their mouth. I can't imagine that they sit at home when there's somebody in need who needs to be visited. There are people watching us all the time. Not like Big Brother, don't get scared. But you know they are. Because somebody who doesn't know Christ looks to others who do to see if that's for them. We have to move beyond focusing on our own needs. We have to be willing and eager, in fact, to reach out to the needs of others, to the least, the lost, the lonely, and the hurting people that are all around us. We need to see a need and meet it, not just wait for somebody to ask. Got some great examples here. Wheelchair ramp needs to be built. We do it. Volunteers need lunch. Volunteers who are working with Habitat for Humanity. So we make sandwiches. There's a mentally challenged class over at the school. So we go over once a month and we work with the children. We work with our own and neighborhood kids. Wow. We visit the shut-ins, the hospitalized. We can help out in the office or at twice as nice. They're starting to put in community gardens. The list could go on and on. And you may be sitting there today seeing a need and wondering, what do I do about it? Open your eyes, as the choir sang earlier. Open our eyes. What would Jesus have you do to show the example of a mind of servanthood? Echoing Paul's words, Albert Schweitzer had a wonderful thing to say, and I leave you with this. I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I do know. The only ones among you who will be really happy in life are those who have sought and found how to serve. May it be so with you. Amen.